Welcome back and welcome in, everyone. I'm Corey Childs, professional dog trainer and owner of Pet Logic Animal Training here in the Seattle area. This is episode 2 of the Pet Logic podcast, a podcast that explores all things dog training, behavior, and life using a force-free approach rooted in science. Today, I'm touching on 3 important topics that follow up on my last episode where I talked about how to choose a dog trainer. I wanted to go more deeply about some of the red flags to look out for when choosing a trainer, and I also get asked a lot about the so-called big box trainers, or the ones that work for those larger nationwide pet store chains, so I'll be touching on that as well. Lastly, I will cover some typical training options to consider when trying to decide what type of training you need. I briefly talked about it in the last episode, but people had some questions, so I wanted to elaborate just a little further. A quick reminder that this episode, along with episode 1, do have an accompanying blog post that lays it all out for you, so I'll drop the link in the description, so be sure to check that out. As I go through the episode, I'm going to try to be both as brief and descriptive as I can, so if there's something you want me to elaborate further on in a future episode, then definitely let me know. But jumping directly in, when it comes to red flags to look out for, there are several, but the first one is usually a lack of reputable credentials. I covered many of the organizations in my last episode and that corresponding blog post, so I won't go through them all again, but I firmly believe that any reputable trainer either has, or is at least working on obtaining, a professional certification from a reputable organization. It shows that they understand the science behind behavior modification, that they have experience, and that they are always continuing their education as new information is coming out. For me, their absence shows either a lack of knowledge or experience, a lack of professionalism or dedication, or, and this is a big one, that their training techniques aren't allowed by those organizations, which means that at best they have no real scientific basis, and at worst, they're abusive. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some amazing unaccredited trainers, but it's generally the easiest to spot and the biggest red flag. Though there are some exceptions that can be made if they're teaching specific courses or apprenticing with the oversight of a fully fledged trainer. After all, even obtaining the accreditation requires hundreds of hours of actually working directly with clients, and that has to come from somewhere. So what does that all mean? Either their name should be followed by a string of letters, or at least their website should list their qualifications. For me, that's the CPDT-KA, which means I'm a certified professional dog trainer through the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers. All the reputable organizations have searchable directories, which you should use to verify those claims if you plan on hiring someone. I give you a list of those organizations along with links to their website and directories in that blog post as well. Of course, experience is important too. However, if they talk a lot about their experience but don't have any credentials to prove their knowledge, that's a red flag too. Believe me when I say that you can do something very badly for a very long time. Experience does not equate skill. It's great to see experience, but that alone doesn't really prove anything. Some of the absolute worst handling and methodologies I've seen have come from alleged industry professionals with decades of experience. And that's not trainer-specific either. Groomers, daycare attendants, business owners, you name it. If a profession exists, you can bet there's somebody who has been doing a terrible job for 20 years with all the confidence in the world. But I digress. Moving on to our next red flag, and man is it a hot button issue, is the use of pain, fear, or intimidation, and the use of tools that cause them. That's prong collars, shock collars, also called e-collars, choke chains, leash corrections or pops, alpha rolls, or anything else that really falls into that camp. I'm probably going to get some flack for saying it, but you do have to watch out. There are those that hide it or play it off as no big deal. There's also those people who refer to themselves as a balanced trainer because they don't only use those aversive techniques, but do use food or other rewards as well. That's why it's so important to do your research and choose a trainer whose methods align with what you are comfortable with. And look, I'll be the first to admit that there are many extremely talented balanced trainers, and that certainly some tools and techniques are more egregious than others. I also won't tell you that they don't get results. Punishment works, but it has all kinds of unintended consequences, even when used really skillfully, which is rarely the case for an unexperienced client. Most importantly for me though, I don't want to hurt or scare my dog, especially if there's a way that works better. The science is pretty clear on the use of aversive tools and techniques and the numerous reasons to avoid them. The American Veterinary Society of Animal Behaviorists, the American College of Veterinary Behaviorists, along with virtually every reputable organization certifying trainers, uses what they call the LEMA policy. That is, least intrusive, minimally aversive, or some iteration thereof, recommending generally against the use of pain, fear, or intimidation in training, and if it must be used at all, it is after all other approaches have failed, never as a go-to method. And even though I'm sure I'll get some flack for saying it from some parts of the community, I do want to say that I believe the vast majority of those balanced trainers truly do care about and want to help dogs. I hear where they're coming from, and I get why they see things the way they do, even if I don't agree with them necessarily. Discussions between the two sides always inevitably devolve into blaming and accusations, and it's really a shame because there's a lot of good to be found, and we're all really in it to help those people and their dogs. Still, the topic of balance training and aversives could have many episodes entirely dedicated to them, but for me, it's generally a red flag. It's extremely rare that there isn't a better way. The next set of red flags is talking about becoming the alpha, being the dominant, being the pack leader, demanding respect, or forcing dogs to submit. Now, the devil is in the details. Dominance is absolutely a behavioral phenomenon worth discussing, and you do want to be a fair and consistent leader, know how to tell your dog no, and to set fair boundaries. But the vast majority of trainers who use that type of terminology do so at best because they're uneducated and at worst as justification for blatant abuse. Staying with me so far, I know it's a lot of info thrown at you quickly. Hopefully I'm being brief and explaining it enough for everyone, and some of the topics are a little heavier than others, but I hope you're following along. Up next, we have demanding money without answering your questions. In the previous episode, I went over some good questions you can ask as a prospective trainer, and I said not to expect a seminar from them, but that they should be able to answer you. And as a trainer, it's a delicate balance. I can give you my overall approach, but without knowing your dog, you, your home, etc., I can't tell you exactly what techniques I'll use. There are numerous approaches to train anything, and it's rarely a one-size-fits-all. In that same vein, trainers are generally not going to spend an hour on the phone with you if you aren't even an active client with them, but they should be able to give you their general approach and be able to talk about that science backing up their techniques if needed. Up next, if they are asking for money up front without any communication with you, especially for very expensive packages, that's a huge red flag. And I feel like I don't really need to go into the reasons why, but there are some sketchy people out there, so don't get scammed. Our next one is not allowing other family members or only allowing one person to attend. Now, this one is highly dependent on exactly what you're doing. If it's an educational course without your dog or an online training webinar, something like that, it's fairly reasonable that it's per person. But if it's them working directly with you, especially in a private lesson, that's a red flag. Generally, if possible, I want the whole family to be involved or everyone who will be working with the dog. I also don't want information to be lost or misconstrued as it gets repeated to spouses, kids, etc. Of course, there are potential issues with very young or overly disruptive children, or for group classes where if everybody brought their entire family, there would be a room of 8 dogs and 40 people. In general, though, most group classes allow at least 2 people, and in a private setting, it's nice for the whole family to be involved when possible. But again, if you're not sure, do ask questions. Speaking of, a big one for me is also trainers that are dismissive of your questions, ignore your limitations or goals, or otherwise just aren't listening to you. They should be there to help you and your dog with your goals, which may not be something like competition level obedience, and while they may have advice, direction, or criticism, sometimes that may even contradict something that you think or do. That's partly why they're there. It should always be a respectful, two-sided conversation. But our last red flag is anything that makes you feel off or uncomfortable. There's really something to be said about trusting your gut instinct, and sometimes it's hard to say exactly what makes you feel that way. It could be the language they use, the way they treat you or your dog, anything really. If you aren't comfortable, you should either ask clarifying questions or look for a different trainer. So let's move on to the big box trainers, and even ones that work at larger facilities employing multiple trainers. We'll start with the latter. There are many wonderful facilities that hire prospective trainers that don't yet have credentials behind their name. I think in that case, it's completely fine so long as they are being taught and guided by a reputable mentor. Usually they will be teaching group classes with set curriculums, overseeing puppy groups, or things that have a more narrowed scope of responsibility, which is totally fine. And if you have questions or doubts, again, please reach out to that business. Very rarely are these going to be those large nationwide chains. And it is exactly those chains that I want to touch on next. And again, I'm referring to those trainers who work for large nationwide pet stores. These can be extremely hit or miss. Most of them are technically accredited, but oftentimes it's through the store's own educational program. Usually these are very limited courses, anywhere from a few weeks to a few months in length, which is not nearly long enough in my opinion. They are fairly limited in scope, and in my experience, they are also really pushed to suggest the tools that particular store sells. And I'll be the first to tell you that there are often better equipment options out there, especially for specific cases, but likely they wouldn't tell you that. Personally, I would still look for an accreditation from one of those reputable organizations I mentioned in the previous episode, in addition to any accreditation that the store might provide using its own courses. There are some pluses, though. They tend to be fairly affordable if you don't need a ton of individual help. Their methodology is usually fairly force-free, and there are some fantastic and experienced trainers to be found there, but it is very dependent on the trainer and very dependent on the store. Speaking as a trainer too, many of them have incredibly restrictive non-compete agreements even after you leave the store. Imagine that you're a new trainer trying to find your feet and gain experience, but have to sign something that says you can't operate for 6 months to several years within 10 miles of a store that basically has locations within every city. I would likely look elsewhere, and that is unfortunately often the case with these places. The last thing I wanted to touch on today are some common training options and what might be right for your dog. I'll start off with private lessons. These are usually one-on-one lessons in your home or their facility, or occasionally something like a local park. An important thing to think about is if you want to work in your home, that can be a great option for shy or fearful dogs, or if your issues are primarily related to that home environment. An example would be integrating a new dog with your resident cat. You're not going to do a whole lot of good, hanging out in a group of 8 dogs when the problem really is integration in your home. So be sure to know where the lesson will be taking place. Private lessons are usually more expensive than group classes, but they are extremely flexible and offer you much more direct one-on-one assistance. Since there aren't other people or dogs around, they are also a great option for reactive or fearful or aggressive dogs, though there are some reactive group classes that I'll get into shortly. But next up is the virtual lessons, which means that they don't even have to be in your area, which is definitely a plus, and you don't even have to leave your home. The obvious downside is that the trainer can't work directly with your dog, and it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. In my experience, these are great for behavioral or management issues, while hands-on is usually easier for more skill-intensive training, where the specific physical technique of teaching your dog can make a big difference in the outcome, especially if you're an inexperienced owner and you haven't done a lot of training. The devil is really in the details and how you should position yourself, how you should move your treat, where you should reward them, the timing of things. There's a lot of nuance there that can have just absolutely massive differences in outcome, so sometimes that hands-on approach is really useful. Though I will say, I think the more experience you have, the better virtual lessons are. So if you're brand new, you can certainly do it. There's a lot of use to it. But especially if you're pretty practiced and you've done a lot of training previously, it makes it way, way easier to understand what they're talking about and to pick up these kind of new or specific skills without needing that, as much direct guidance. And of course, there are unguided virtual lessons where you watch recorded videos as well. These are often very cost-effective, but obviously lack any of that real direct one-on-one work, but awesome for picking up just new information or skills in general. Up next is the myriad of group classes you may see. Typically, these are cheaper than private training and allow your dog to work around new people and other dogs, which, depending on your dog, can be good or bad. Have a fearful or reactive dog who absolutely loses it even seeing another dog or stranger? Maybe not the best option to stick him in a room full of those things that he's afraid of. Group classes also tend to follow specific curriculum, which means that they're little options for off-topic issues. There's usually only 1 to 2 trainers for a group of people, so you can also expect much less individual attention. Many of them focus on foundational or advanced obedience, leash skills, of course, agility, or other specific goals applicable to just dog owners in general. A rather unique option, though, is group classes for reactive dogs. Often called Growly Dog or Reactive Rover, these classes partner up students with the explicit goal of helping them with behaviors such as leash barking at other dogs and other reactivity issues. After all, it is an unfortunate truth that if you want your dog to not bark or lunge at other dogs, they do in fact have to work around other dogs. I also want to note that although group classes obviously have a group of dogs, they are rarely there to socialize with each other directly, with the exception of puppy classes, puppy socialization classes, things like that. Usually there are rules against dogs even meeting unless it's otherwise specified. There are, of course, lots of classes based around specific skills as well, such as agility, scent work, herding, etc., and many dog sports have local clubs that teach as well. Even if you're not competing, these can be great just to have fun with your dog, boost their confidence, or get some exercise. Don't think you have to compete in agility trials to take agility classes. There are even special shy dog group classes for those looking to gain confidence with like-minded wallflowers. And really, the training and class options are as varied as the trainers. Virtually everyone will offer something at least slightly different, so be sure to read up on those options in your area. And as I keep saying, if you have questions, definitely reach out to those trainers as well. But that is going to wrap up today's topics. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review, and if you have thoughts on today's topics, drop a comment on platforms where you're able. Thank you so much for listening, and you can find any relevant links in the description or the show notes. Give your dog a good scritch under the collar for me, and I will see you for the next episode.